Welcome to Baptist Press This Week, sponsored by the College at Southeastern. In this episode of Baptist Press This Week, we hear from Mike Stone. He is one of the announced candidates for Southern Baptist Convention President in New Orleans. Stay with us as we talk with Pastor Mike Stone. Pastor Stone, thanks for joining us. We're so glad to have you on Baptist Press This Week. It's rare for a sitting SBC president to face an opponent. Why do you believe it's necessary this year?
Let me just say right up front that I respect that precedent. I think generally speaking, under normal times, that is a valuable thing for an organization. Not only because a president will often come with initiatives or emphases that he wants to share with Southern Baptists, and sometimes it takes 2 years, to unfold that emphasis. Also, it's not always the healthiest thing as a general rule to have a contested election every 12 months when we could have those every 24 months instead. So I do value the history, at least since the days of the conservative resurgence, and would not allow myself to be nominated against a sitting president unless I believe that these were rather unprecedented times. When I served as chairman of the Executive Committee, I've served in so many capacities here in the Georgia Baptist Convention, was nominated for president back in 2021. Dr. Litton was elected by a vote roughly of 52 to 48. And because of a lot of the things surrounding that entire process, I thought when I came back to Georgia, I was going to focus the rest of my life and ministry shepherding my family. I have a wife and 4 great kids, the oldest of which is with the IMB right now on a summer mission trip doing international church planting in Madrid, Spain. But I thought I'd spend the rest of my ministry shepherding my family and pastoring the wonderful folks here at Emmanuel Baptist Church. I've been here 26 and a half years total. Next month will be 21 years as the senior pastor. But the news that came out of the February Executive Committee meeting really began to stir my heart, and it began to make my phone ring. Most of the pastors and church leaders watching this interview recognize that when things happen at a denominational level, your phone begins to ring with people asking, have you seen this story? Did you know about this? And what do you think about it? And so the February Executive Committee meeting not only showed me some deep concerns that I have with some of the direction of our convention, but it also stirred the hearts of a broad coalition of leaders, some of whom had not supported my nomination back in 2021, but they've seen over the last 2 years that some of the questions that I've raised and the issues that I've brought to the surface are really resonating with their heart. So that EC meeting really stirred my heart and stirred the hearts of those who asked me if I would pray about receiving a nomination. Before we get into what those issues are, I would just also like to reiterate up front that I love being a Southern Baptist. I'm a Southern Baptist by choice and conviction. I was not raised in a Southern Baptist church, but after high school, having studied the Bible and saw that it was different from the denomination in which I was raised, I started visiting churches all over my hometown of Valdosta, Georgia, and ended up joining and receiving what I believe to be my scriptural baptism in a Southern Baptist church, and have given my entire life and my vocational ministry to the work of the local church and Georgia Baptist and Southern Baptist since that time. So I am not the guy out there that is mad about everything in the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm grateful for the work of our IMB, the biblically based church plants that now I'm leading out in that effort, 6 top-tier world-class seminaries educating over 1/3 of the seminarians on the North American continent. We do disaster relief as well as just about anybody in the world. I would put Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, those yellow shirts, I would put them against Samaritan's Purse and the Red Cross. We do it so well, and we're able to do it not only in the name of the Lord Jesus, but on behalf of Southern Baptist. So I'm not the person who is angry about being a Southern Baptist or disgruntled in that regard. But I'm also not a Pollyanna pastor that thinks that all things are well. I have some concerns, and I believe that the unsustainable financial trajectory that the accountants and the audit for the Executive Committee announced at the EC meeting in February, that was a major thing, as well as the announcement about partnering again with Guidepost Solutions. I recognize the task force has backed off of that decision. We could talk about that perhaps in the balance of this interview. But those are things that led me to believe that we are on an unsustainable path. And some of that, I believe, is because of some decisions made by our current president, who I love as a brother in the Lord. I was blessed to call him on the day that I was announced as a nominee, and I initiated that call to share with him my love for him. I count him as a dear brother. Don't want to disparage him in any way personally, but I do have some differences with the direction of our current leadership. And those are the things that led me and others to believe that we don't have another year to wait to begin addressing these issues.
You talked some about your love for national SBC causes and entities and things along those lines. In other interviews, you've shared about some tough decisions that you all have made at Blackshear about your CP funds presently. Would you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, as I mentioned, next month, just a few weeks actually, I'll celebrate my 21st anniversary as pastor here at Emmanuel. And over those 21 years, we averaged just under 9% in undesignated receipts given through the cooperative program. I have always been designated, even within our own state, as a cooperative program champion. Even though we're in a very small town of 4,000 people, God has blessed our ministry here with some significant growth, certainly relative to our community. And because of that, we have been at various times a top 10 church in the Georgia Baptist Convention, which is always one of the largest CP giving churches in our larger family of the SBC. When I was president of the state convention, 2017, 2018, I appointed a long-range task force to do some long-range studies about the health of the cooperative program here in Georgia and in the larger work of our Southern Baptist Convention. So I have been blessed to be a pastor that's heavily involved and heavily invested in the work of the cooperative program, funding what we do together as Southern Baptist. I have probably been a bigger champion of that than the overwhelming majority of pastors in the SBC. We've shown all the videos, we've used the logos in our bulletin, we've had up the banners and the flyers and all of those sorts of things because we have been very committed to the work of Southern Baptist through the cooperative program. However, when I was serving as chairman of the executive committee and then following that 2 additional years on the executive committee, I began to see some of the troubling trends where we were spending some of these funds on things that I did not believe that the Southern Baptist Convention and the executive committee should be spending missions funds on. Further, and while I don't want to make this overly personal, you indicate I have shared more details in my own personal podcast called Pastor to Pastor. Did an episode on the fact that Baptist Press, the executive committee, has exculpatory evidence where I've been falsely accused of covering up sexual abuse in the Guidepost report and in subsequent articles in Baptist Press. There's a video of an alleged encounter that I had with a young lady at the Nashville convention. The executive committee has possession of that. There's exculpatory evidence that our leaders of the executive committee and the Southern Baptist Convention more broadly will not share. And I just say bluntly, Brandon, that is a hard sell to take to a business committee meeting, to a finance committee meeting, to a deacon fellowship meeting, and share with them that we should continue to send hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to finance these types of things. As a result of that, many leaders in my church wanted to suspend giving completely, but I've been the linchpin keeping us involved and invested in the work of Southern Baptist. So we chose to do that through the vehicle and the avenue that was approved by the convention back during the Great Commission Resurgence days that we now call Great Commission Giving. So last year in 2022, we gave directly to Southern Baptist entity as well as to entities here in the Georgia Baptist Convention. We gave right at $100,000 to Baptist causes. We have also escrowed the balance of that because we hope, and it is our prayer, that these matters can be addressed and we can feel comfortable continuing to give at the historic level of this church. So once again, if there's a pastor out there who is disgruntled with the cooperative program, disgruntled with everything Southern Baptist, and doesn't want to give to Baptist causes, I am not that pastor at all. But if there are other pastors out there who believe that we should just not express any concerns about these matters and just continue to throw money into an unsustainable hole that I believe is leading us in a bad direction, then I'm not going to be that pastor either. Our church continues to be very invested in the work of Southern Baptist as well as Georgia Baptist We're also the leading contributing church to our local Baptist association. We give 2% of our undesignated receipts to the local association. And this year, our church will single-handedly give about 20% of the overall associational budget. So again, if somebody's looking for a cooperative program champion over a 21-year period, but who has some concerns about how some of that money is being spent, at least at the national EC level, then I would encourage them to seriously consider coming to Nashville, and I'd be grateful for your support.
Now, you've gone on the record, so to talk a little bit about one of the issues you just mentioned, you've gone on the record to be utterly against sexual abuse, allowing sexual abuse to have any place in a local church and the SBC. So just want to be very clear about that from the start here.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
And Brandon, I'd like to just add as a point of personal testimony, I am myself a victim of sexual abuse. I experienced that from the 3rd grade through the 5th grade. Only escaped that because of a different circumstance, a change in my life. I did not share that with anyone. As far as I know, that abuse was only known to me and my abuser for 40 years until I shared it with the world in the February 2019 meeting of the SBC Executive Committee, because I wanted to communicate to abuse victims, as well as to my larger Southern Baptist family, that I do abhor that. I abhor it personally. I abhor it parentally. I abhor it pastorally. We have very strong safeguards and measures here in our church. We have required training for all of our workers. We have policies in our church that are really stricter than even what the law would require as far as adherence to our own church's policies, trying to systematically and regularly train and retrain all of our workers who would work with minors and other vulnerable populations to identify grooming behaviors and to understand the law requires immediate contact with the police if there's any suspicion of that nature. So yes, at every level of my life, I absolutely detest, despise, abhor, could not use enough strong verbs to describe my hatred for any type of abuse, sexual abuse in particular in this conversation. The only thing, Brandon, that I think makes sexual abuse any more heinous than it would already be is when it's done in a context that drags the name of the Lord Jesus into it and becomes then not only a sin and a crime issue, but it becomes a blasphemy issue, that it would occur in a way that sullies the gospel and sullies the image and the glory of the Lord Jesus.
Along those lines, with that approach to sexual abuse, you've had some concerns about the Guidepost report that was released in May of 2022. That report specifically talked about you in an instance where you were working alongside another Georgia Baptist church. Would you share a little bit of those concerns with us?
Yeah, and before I get to the Guidepost report, my ongoing concerns is the absolute refusal of people who have already seen clear, legally sustainable documentation and refuse to correct the record. It is an indication of a process that we've embarked on as Southern Baptists that, among other things, shows that we're using unequal weights and measures. People get treated differently based on who they are and who they run with and who they have supported in the past, and that is biblically unsustainable. I also have a problem with it because I never felt that we needed a third-party investigator to go outside the body of Christ to look into these matters to begin with. Some have suggested that when I was chairman of the executive committee that I supported a contract with Guidepost. I was not chairman when those conversations were happening. Brother Roland Slade was, and I was actually not in support of even that initial contract with Guidepost. But certainly, since the infamous LGBTQIA plus supporting tweet that Guidepost Solutions put out last June during what would some would call Pride Month, I have been greatly opposed to any ongoing partnership with Guidepost Solutions. Now, specific to the allegation that they made about me and the bad light in which they cast me, they gave the appearance, at least, of reporting that I had assisted a pastor here in Georgia of covering up his sexual abuse and intimidating a sexual abuse victim in that church. Brandon, I want to just go on record that absolutely no part of that kind of allegation is true whatsoever. Back in 2019, I was contacted by the leaders of a church here in my state. I did know their pastor very well. I'd preached in his church. He had preached in mine. You're a former pastor, and so you develop relationships with churches when you have repeat opportunities to preach in their church and fellowship with their people. Their leadership contacted me because they discovered their pastor had been texting a woman in their church. They and I were concerned about that right off the bat, just the volume of text messages to someone not his wife. They assured me repeatedly that there was nothing sexual in those text messages. I would also add that my deacon ministry, doing their own inquiry into the usage of my name in the Guidepost report, interviewed the current pastor and the then leaders of that church. They reiterated that there was nothing sexual in those text messages. That was my level of knowledge and information. There were other sins that were included in those text messages, such as foul language. Because of that, I advised them the pastor should be terminated. They decided to put him on a leave of absence instead. And as laymen who are unskilled in dealing with these kind of issues before a congregation that was running around 500 in attendance or so, they asked me if I would assist them in drafting some kind of statement. How will we share this with the church? So I did draft sort of a script just to assist them. These, again, untrained in this context, laymen who wanted to wisely address this issue with their church. And I made that draft available to Guidepost Solutions through a blanket offering of documents. They chose to not request that document, but instead, on page 77, won't surprise anyone that I remember the page number of that particular section, they paint it in a way in which a typical reader might read that and think that I assisted him in covering up sexual abuse. When I contacted Guidepost and asked for a retraction on that, I have legal documentation, and Brandon, you have seen this. You yourself described this legal letter from Guidepost attorneys as a smoking gun. That was your phrase and not mine. That documentation is a smoking gun, where Guidepost itself, through their attorneys, admits that they did not accuse me of having any knowledge of any sexual content in those text messages. They did not accuse me of intimidating the woman in that church. Now, reports in Baptist press as well as secular media drawn off of some of those reports paint an entirely different picture. But Guidepost attorneys themselves indicate in their letter that they did not accuse me of intimidating that witness, but in one of the most absurd legal arguments that I've ever seen or read in my life, they themselves acknowledge that they only reported on what the unnamed lady in that church felt. And I would emphasize that word because they emphasized it. And again, Brandon, you've seen this letter from the attorneys yourself. Guidepost acknowledges we didn't accuse Mike of knowing any specific information about any of that. We're just saying that this is how an unnamed witness in that church felt when they found out that the pastor that the leaders had gotten advice from was the chairman of the SBC Executive Committee at that time. And I want to go on record. I want to say it in a statesman-like, loving, Christ-like way. But if that's the case, Southern Baptists should be asking, why was that account ever listed in a multi-million-dollar report that we paid millions of missions dollars, whether that's out of Sin Relief, the Cooperative program, or the CP, money on hand? We paid millions of hard-earned, sacrificially given missions dollars because this was supposedly the best, the top, best in the business, professional, trauma-informed investigators. And yet they're very quick to paint that in a way that would cast me in a bad light. And I've been deeply frustrated by that, as you could imagine, because as a husband, as a dad, as a pastor, as a minister of the gospel, all I have is my name and reputation. And I would just add, finally, that it is but illustrative of the problem that we have in the way we're dealing with sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention. Namely, we are very quick to publish information, but we are extremely hesitant to say anything to back up on that. And the latest reports that I've gotten out of the Executive Committee are that this correction cannot be made even by Baptist press because we're concerned that if Baptist Press or the Executive Committee paints the Guidepost report in a negative light, it will be used against the Executive Committee in other ongoing litigation. And I just want to say bluntly that when we put ourselves in a position that our own convention leaders are unwilling to correct their own records and share the truth because we're concerned that sharing the truth and correcting the record will paint us in a bad legal light, we are far worse off for our partnership and our heading down this direction than I think the average Southern Baptist could even begin to imagine. So I don't want to just spend a lot of time sharing my own personal story, except to say my own personal challenges that still to this day have not been corrected by Baptist Press or by the Executive Committee. The task force has this information. The fact that none of this has been corrected is but an illustration of the fact that, Pastor, if you come to New Orleans and support me as president, I will do my very best with the limited but very real powers of the president to make sure that my past does not become your future or the future of your church. This should be unacceptable to Southern Baptists that we would knowingly treat a Southern Baptist pastor this way.
What are some of the things that you see in the current trajectory of the abuse reform implementation task force that you would do differently, or as we move forward? I mean, it seems like running against a sitting president, that's got to figure into the equation that there's a different direction that you want to go in dealing with the way sexual abuse is being addressed. What are some of those ways that you would address it?
Yeah, well, the first way has to be the first way, and that is the way that we treat and talk about one another. I've tried, even in this interview, to speak respectfully of those who I believe have damaged me and my reputation in some very egregious and sinful ways. But I try to speak with love and respect from the very beginning of this national conversation, which I think most of us would tie back. Perhaps we would tie it back to 2019 in February, the articles that came out in the Houston Chronicle, the Abuse of Faith series of articles that they put out, and the naming of 10 churches in the February 2019 meeting of the Executive Committee, those churches being named by Dr. Greer. One of the first things that I began to notice personally and painfully is that if you advocate a different approach on this issue, you are vilified and accused of not caring about sexual abuse, even wanting to cover up sexual abuse. We're very quick in our personal conversations, our social media accounts. There is an absolutely false article that came out just last week in SBC Voices about some of my involvement with another situation, where we would rather rush to the internet and tag leftist secular newspapers to come help us defame a brother than simply pick up the phone and try to have a conversation. So the first thing that we have to do is try to change the tone and the tenor of the conversation and stop accusing people of not caring about sexual abuse. I think the fact that the measures that have been put forward, some of which I agree with and are very good measures, some of which I have concerns about, but when you go to the last several annual meetings, they have been almost unanimously approved by the convention messengers. And that just shows where Southern Baptists are on this issue. I don't know Southern Baptist pastors by any measurable number who are in favor of sexual abuse. So the first thing that I would try to do from the office of president is to help us tone down the rhetoric. And if that means calling out some people who constantly engage in defamation and false attacks, then so be it. Also, from the very beginning of this national conversation, we have promoted an atmosphere of guilty until proven innocent. If listeners would go back to the statement that President Greer made in the February 2019 EC meeting, he even called on those 10 churches that he named to cooperate with us to show that they had corrected the errors in their church. And I just want to say that just because abuse has occurred in a church certainly does not necessarily mean that that church has something they need to correct. The idea that if abuse occurs, that you're guilty of some malfeasance or some neglect, that you need to document to us that it has been corrected, I think set this entire conversation off in an unhealthy, unbiblical direction. I believe that where abuse occurs, the overwhelming percentage of the time, it occurs in spite of all of the positions and the policies that church has put forward. Even some of the more recent actions of the Credentials Committee, contacting churches and asking them to give an answer or to prove that they did not do something. It should not be the responsibility of an individual or a church to try to prove what they did not do. We should be acting on information that has already been given to the Executive Committee, the Credentials Committee in this case, by finders of fact. A Baptist committee meeting by Zoom or at a conference table in downtown Nashville, Tennessee, is not authorized or capable of being a finder of fact as to what happened in a particular case of abuse. We should be focused on documentation, facts that are already readily available as to what that church knew, when did the church know what they knew, and how did that church respond. I've also been very public that I think we have ecclesiological issues because of actions from the Executive Committee, statements from some of our leaders, including a resolution that came out of last year's Resolutions Committee, where we seem to be taking upon ourselves at the national level responsibility and with that liability for acts of abuse and egregious things that occurred in the context of individual, independent, autonomous Baptist churches. I believe that where abuse occurs and when it occurs in a church, by definition and by nature, it's going to involve a cover-up, trying to cover it up by the perpetrator, if by no one else. So the issue is not, does abuse occur? The question is not, does abuse occur in churches, or does it occur in churches in cooperation with the SBC? The issue is not, has it been covered up? The question before us is, who committed the abuse and who covered it up? And the responsibility, and with that, the liability, should go back to that local church. And I think for that reason, the Southern Baptist Convention generally, the Executive Committee specifically, has found itself under an onslaught of litigation, including a criminal investigation by the federal government, the U.S. Justice Department, now investigating the SBC on allegations that we have allowed to be published and perpetuated about us as if the SBC Executive Committee has covered up sexual abuse. And Brandon, I'll conclude this answer by saying bluntly, I have never seen any evidence that a single case of sexual abuse was covered up by the Executive Committee of the Southern Baptist Convention. When I made that statement a couple of weeks ago at a live stream event in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, it lit up SBC Twitter. Even secular media outlets, particularly those who operate in the religious or the evangelical sphere, really took note of that. I think Southern Baptists should be shocked and troubled that it took a presidential candidate speaking at a live stream event to make that statement when it's simply the truth. It is so true and so verifiable that our own sitting president made that same claim under oath in a deposition in a Texas lawsuit, that he too did not know of a single case that had come to the SBC or the Executive Committee that had been covered up or not properly reported. I just wish that our national leaders would speak with that same kind of clarity when they're talking to national media outlets, rather than allowing, through actions and in some cases by silence, allowing the churches of the SBC to be misrepresented as a cesspool for child abuse, for sexual abuse, and the molestation of vulnerable people. These are but a few of the ways that I think we've headed in the wrong direction. And I guess I would add one additional item, and it is the idea that we would publish a database of people who have been accused of crimes. Now, I understand that the database, which is being labeled as a credibly accused database, getting ready to be launched, and to the extent that it includes the names of those who have been convicted of crimes, I have been and continue to be very much in favor of that. To the extent that it includes the names of people who have confessed in privileged settings, for example, in civil litigation, I'm all in favor of publishing those names, cross-referencing those names with any way that it intersects Southern Baptist life, whether that's a convicted or a confessed abuser, whoever graduated from one of our seminaries, ever worked for one of our entities or agencies, is ever known to have been a pastor, a staff member, or even a known and noted volunteer in one of the churches that cooperate with the SBC. I am 100% in favor of putting those names out there. But I continue to be troubled by the latest update from the task force, because while they say we're not yet ready to move forward with what people might recognize as Category 4, those names that have just been, quote, credibly accused, they're still moving forward with that. They've not moved away from that. They emphatically state that they're not moving away from that. We're just not ready to begin publishing those names. And Brandon, I would say, in light of the first part of this interview, some of the things I shared earlier about some of the same people, the same players, the same process that have defamed my name and are unwilling for political and legal purposes to clear the record, I'm not comfortable at all with the SBC being in charge of such a database or of farming it out, contracting it out to a third-party corporation that does not have the interest of truth at heart, that will be more concerned about liability than simply telling the truth. These are the few of the things that I would seek to help have a national conversation about. And if there is an additional task force that is authorized by the convention, and by the way, let me finally reiterate here, the ultimate authority rests in the messengers to the convention. So I'm not advocating unilateral action by the president or action unto itself by a presidentially appointed task force. But as president, I would appoint a task force that shared some of these concerns, that would properly investigate these matters and bring back solid recommendations to the messengers to the Southern Baptist Convention, so that messengers beginning in Indianapolis 2024 can begin to put our convention on what I believe to be a more biblical and more sustainable pathway.
So here at the College of Southeastern, we are equipping students to give their lives for the cause of Christ in the church, among the nations, and in every aspect of society. So the College of Southeastern is not just a Bible college. While the Bible is the foundation for all of our degrees and even all of our courses, we're going to equip students in a variety of fields so that they can give their lives for the cause of Christ in any number of different ways.
In the context that we have here, the kind of education that we have here is not a choosing between a really good education versus a Christian education. I think the best education possible is one that holds Christ at the center, who is the truth and the way and the life.
I would stack our graduates up against any university graduates. They really receive a well-rounded education, a tough education, but at the same time, really being filled up with learning to live out the gospel.
Truly, everything we do is to equip students to give their lives for Christ's cause, in the church, among the nations, in every aspect of society. When you leave this place, you really do look more like Jesus. If you want your life to be that, then you need to be here.
Another issue that you've talked about is the role of women in pastoral ministry. That's been quite an issue over this last year in the SBC. What are your thoughts on that issue?
Well, let me give a little bit of history that will give my theological position, my position as a convention, because I don't think that my personal theological position has to be matched by every church in the convention. What I would do in my local church may not be exactly what another church may do, and they can still be considered in friendly cooperation with the SBC. But my first national involvement in this conversation was coming out of the Birmingham Convention. There was a motion referred to the SBC Executive Committee. I was chaired at the time, that we look at amending the Baptist Faith and Message to insert the words "and function" into the relevant article, that the office and function of pastor would be limited to men as qualified by Scripture. Brandon, at that point, I was not in favor of that amendment to the Baptist Faith and Message for two reasons. Number one, I thought the BFM was already clear, and I thought it would be sort of just unnecessary to add clarifying language when I thought it was already clear. Secondly, I was not in favor of amending our statement of faith to deal with what I thought was an organizational issue. I would be much more in favor of amending our governing documents, such as the Constitution and bylaws, rather than using an organizational issue as a reason to amend or change the statement of faith. In our case, of course, the BF&M. But something else happened at the Birmingham Convention, and that is we restructured the Credentials Committee to be a standing committee to investigate these matters of cooperation. And I discovered in that context that there were people on that Credentials Committee who did not think that having a woman serving as senior pastor was an issue. They believed it to be a matter of local church autonomy. And I do agree that it's a matter of local church autonomy. We don't have the ability or the authority to tell a church who they can or can't hire to be their pastor. But in that context, I realized that there wasn't clarity on this issue that I thought was on that issue. For that reason, I am in favor of the disfellowshipping of Saddleback and the other church that is coming to the convention to appeal that removal. And I would recommend and encourage fellow messengers in New Orleans to uphold that recommendation from the Credentials Committee, the action of the Executives Committee, and not allow these churches to come back into fellowship with the SBC. I'm also in favor of Mike Law's amendment. There may be a way that I might word it slightly differently, but I believe the overall effect of it is good, and I would encourage the EC to bring that out to the floor for the messengers to address, and that we vote on it overwhelmingly this year, ratify it next year in Indianapolis, mainly to provide some ongoing clarity as to where the messengers stand on this particular issue.
Okay. Another thing that you mentioned in your nomination announcement in that video a few weeks ago was about an evangelistic outreach that you would like to pursue if you become the next president of the SBC. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I believe that the key to addressing some of the troubling decline that we have in the SBC is to be more faithfully and more fervent on the Great Commission. We saw from the last collection of ACP results that Southern Baptist lost 457,000 members of our independent churches. We lost 416 churches. We are a convention in decline. The official number of membership now is 13.2 million. And as most pastors would point out, the FBI probably couldn't find 4 or 5 million of those on any given week. But we are a convention numerically, I'm talking about of people, in decline. Baptisms in the last statistical year took a slight uptick, but we are still woefully down from historic highs across the SBC. And I believe the solution to that is a national evangelism strategy. I'm grateful for evangelism work that is led by the North American Mission Board. I'm thankful for the church planting that occurs through now. I do believe that since the GCR, that at the national level, we have put far too many of our evangelism eggs in the basket of church planting. I'm not opposed to church planting, very much in favor of that. My church has planted a church, but I believe we need a both-and strategy. So what I have put forward is a program that I would encourage us to call Crossover America. Southern Baptists are already familiar with the name Crossover because of the crossover events that happen in the host cities of our annual meeting. But what I would envision some of the older pastors and leaders might remember as just simultaneous wave revivals. But these would have an evangelistic emphasis. If we could identify an 8, maybe a 10-week period on the calendar of the convention that this is when we're going to promote through advertising and through other types of publicity, some of which can be free through social media, that we just promote a Crossover America campaign during that 8 to 10-week period. But one of the aspects I would encourage is that it be done through the local church, rather than the convention sponsoring something that we're asking churches to participate in or partner with or come to, but we serve as a resource for the local church and challenge that church to be on a specific evangelistic mission in their community within their local church. By doing it through the local church, what one of my desires is that we could eliminate some of the things that really divide Southern Baptists, even on something as central as evangelism. Things like music style, things like worship style. Where are we going to meet? What time will the services be? Will it be a single day? Will it be a Sunday morning through Wednesday night schedule? One church may have a tent revival where they bring in a vocational evangelist. Another church may be more reformed in its soteriology, may choose to just have their pastor exegete a salvation passage from the book of Romans, or he may just preach on John 3:16 and encourage the congregation, hey, bring all your lost, unconverted friends here for the Lord's Day services that day. I believe we need an initiative like that to carry the message of the cross, starting with our churches, but ultimately across America and around the world. And I'd be privileged to help lead out in that initiative if Southern Baptists were to choose me as their next president.
We've covered a number of issues in this time together. As we close it up and we're headed to New Orleans, is there anything else that you would want to share with folks as they watch?
Yeah, just that if any of the concerns that I have raised, if they resonate with Southern Baptists, I'm grateful for thoughts and prayers and Facebook posts and retweets and those sorts of things. Grateful for private text messages of encouragement. But text messages are not going to elect the next president of the Southern Baptist Convention. I would encourage you to go ahead and make your plans if you have not already. Get in your car, get on a plane, however you need to get to New Orleans, register as a messenger. Be there. I would encourage you to come early enough to take part in the Pastors Conference. My friend Daniel Dickard has done an incredible job. He has put together an outstanding lineup that I think will be a great encouragement to pastors. I'm excited about the announced nomination of Dr. Stephen Rummage to lead that Pastors Conference the next year. So come to New Orleans, get there in time to celebrate together with the Pastors Conference, be fed and be renewed through that process. Register as a messenger, vote in the election of president, take part in all the business that we're conducting as Southern Baptists. And my prayer is that we can leave New Orleans more focused, more on mission, more united, more cooperative than we've ever been in the past. And so I would just encourage Southern Baptists, let's meet together in New Orleans and move forward for God's glory.
That's good. Thank you so much for joining us on Baptist Press this week. Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week, brought to you by the College at Southeastern. You can learn more about them at thecollegeatsoutheastern.com. Thanks for watching Baptist Press this week.